Let me tell you something I've never said out loud before. There was a night, not long ago, where I sat alone on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest, absolutely terrified, not of a monster, not of the dark, but of my own mind. Fear had completely taken over. The fear of not being good enough, the fear of failing, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, and worst of all, the fear that nothing I ever did would actually matter. I was exhausted, numb, and done pretending I had it all together, and in that exact moment, when I was ready to give up, one verse found me. I didn't go looking for it. It showed up like a whisper in a hurricane. And what happened next, it didn't just comfort me, it rattled me awake, it rewired something inside me, and it did what no motivational speech, no therapist, and no self-help book ever did. It destroyed the fear that had been running my life. It healed my overthinking, my anxiety, and my inner war. You need to hear this verse, not because it's magical, but because it's truth, because the words we speak to ourselves are either weapons or medicine. And the day I chose this verse, I stopped bleeding. So if fear is stealing your joy, if your mind is your enemy, or if you're secretly battling in silence, stay with me. I'm not just going to tell you what the verse was. I'm going to show you how to use it right now to change your own life. This one verse, it's not just words, it's a weapon. Let's begin. Let's talk about fear, not the kind that makes your heart race during a horror movie, but the kind that slowly eats away at you in silence. The fear that keeps you stuck in jobs you hate, relationships that drain you, and routines that numb your soul. It's quiet, it's sneaky, and it wears 100 different masks: anxiety, procrastination, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, indecision, and overthinking. And the worst part, you don't even realize that fear is the one pulling all the strings. I used to think I was just stressed, just busy, just tired, but underneath it all was fear raw, paralyzing fear, and I didn't have the guts to call it out. I remember waking up every morning with this invisible weight on my chest. Nothing in particular had gone wrong, but everything felt off. I had goals, sure, I had plans, but none of them felt possible. Because fear had built this invisible glass box around my life. I could see everything I wanted: clarity, confidence, peace, but no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't break through. And I started to believe the lie that maybe I just wasn't meant for more. Maybe some people get to be bold, joyful, and free, but not me. So I played it safe. I dimmed my light. I avoided risks. I kept my mouth shut even when I wanted to scream. And let me tell you, playing small doesn't feel safe. It feels like slow death. People think fear is just being scared of something, but fear is so much more insidious than that. Fear is convincing yourself that you're being realistic. It's telling yourself not to speak up because it's not the right time. It's staying in situations that make you miserable because at least they're familiar. Fear pretends to protect you, but it's actually the reason your world keeps shrinking. Every time you say no to what you want because you're afraid of judgment, failure, or rejection, fear wins. And every time fear wins, a little piece of your potential dies. Now here's the truth nobody wants to admit. You can be smart, driven, talented, and still be ruled by fear. Because fear doesn't care how capable you are. It only cares how silent you're willing to be, and I was silent for years. I didn't trust myself. I doubted every decision. I kept waiting for some magical sign that it was finally safe to take the leap. But that sign never came, because fear doesn't just go away. It doesn't politely step aside and make room for courage. It has to be challenged, exposed, replaced, and until you face the fear, name it, and refuse to obey it, it will keep running your life like a puppet master. The irony is, we're all so terrified of failing that we never stop to realize we're already failing by staying stuck. We fear rejection, but we're rejecting ourselves every time we shrink to make others comfortable. We fear change, but nothing is more painful than staying the same. and we fear speaking our truth, but silence is what's really killing us. I had to get brutally honest with myself. I had to admit that fear was in the driver's seat, and I was just the passenger making excuses. And that realization, it didn't feel empowering at first. It felt humiliating, because I saw how much of my life I had given away to a feeling. But that's when everything started to shift, when I got so sick of being afraid that I was finally ready to do something radical. That was the breaking point. The moment I realized I couldn't outrun the fear, I had to confront it. And that confrontation, it started with a single verse. I didn't find the verse in a moment of peace or clarity. I wasn't journaling in a cozy corner with soft music playing. I was breaking down, fully unraveling. My mind was spinning with thoughts I couldn't control, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I was tired of fighting my own brain every single day. I was desperate, not for motivation or some feel. Good advice, but for something real. Something that would pierce through the chaos. I wasn't looking for a verse. I wasn't even open to anything at that point. But it found me anyway. It popped up at the exact moment I was ready to give up. A moment where, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't think anything could help me. I wasn't even sure I wanted help. I just wanted the noise in my head to stop. I wanted to feel still, to feel safe, and then I saw it. Just a short verse, not highlighted, not framed, just there almost like a whisper. The power of that moment wasn't in the verse itself. It was in what it did to me. It bypassed all the logic and analysis and hit straight in the gut. It was like my soul recognized it before my brain did. There was no lightning bolt, no angel choir, just this sense of, wait, this is it. The verse didn't tell me everything would be okay. It didn't promise success or perfection. What it did was even more powerful. It called out my fear for what it really was, a liar. It exposed how much I had been believing thoughts that weren't even true. It showed me that my mind was feeding me a narrative that was never mine to begin with, and the verse gave me something solid to replace that narrative with, something I could repeat when my thoughts spiraled. Something that grounded me when anxiety tried to pull me under. That verse became a lifeline not because it was magic, but because it was truth. And truth is the one thing fear can't survive. When you're drowning in fear, you don't need more noise. You need something simple, something sharp, something that slices through the panic and reminds you who you are. That verse did exactly that. Fear wasn't just making me uncomfortable. It was ruining everything. It was in my relationships, keeping me from being honest about what I needed. It was in my work, holding me back from taking bold steps, pitching ideas, or even speaking up in meetings. It was in my head every single morning when I woke up, whispering that today would probably be just like yesterday, stuck, small, and quiet. I had no idea how much fear was stealing from me until I started looking at the results of my life. I wasn't showing up the way I wanted to. I wasn't pursuing the things I dreamed about. I was pretending to be confident, pretending to be okay, pretending that the tightness in my chest and the voice in my head were just part of being an adult. But the truth, I was exhausted because fear was running my life and I didn't even know it. It's not always easy to see when fear is in control. It doesn't always look like panic or screaming. Sometimes it looks like procrastination. You keep putting things off until you're ready, when really you're scared of failing. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Everything has to be just right, not because you care so much, but because you're terrified of being judged. And sometimes it looks like being nice, agreeable, the people, pleaser, because you're afraid of being rejected if you show who you really are. Fear is a master of disguise. It tells you that playing it safe is smart, that staying quiet is wise, that settling is normal, and the more you believe those lies, the more you lose yourself. I believed those lies for way too long, and the worst part, I thought they were my own thoughts. I thought all that doubt and hesitation and self-criticism was just me being realistic. I didn't realize that fear had become the narrator of my life, and until I changed the voice I was listening to, nothing else could change. Fear wasn't just an emotion anymore. It was a mindset, a pattern, a habit, and it was driving every decision I made without me even realizing it. The moment I came across that verse wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It wasn't something I read with a plan to change my life. I was scrolling, half numb, trying to distract myself from my own thoughts. But sometimes the right words hit you in the middle of your mess, and everything just pauses. That's what happened. I saw this one simple verse, and it felt like time froze. It didn't scream at me. It didn't promise miracles. It didn't have fireworks behind it, but it landed like a punch in the chest. It was short, clear, and unbelievably direct. It didn't just speak to me. It exposed me. Every anxious thought I had, every doubt, every fear, it all felt seen in a single line. And for the first time in a long time, something clicked. The words didn't give me new information. They reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I am not my thoughts. I am not my fear. I am not the voice that keeps saying, "You're not enough." That verse became more than just a moment. It became an anchor. Every time my thoughts started spiraling, I'd come back to it. Every time I felt like I couldn't breathe because of the pressure or the overthinking or the panic, I'd repeat it to myself. And slowly, really slowly at first, things began to shift. Not because my circumstances changed, but because the way I saw them did. That verse gave me perspective. It gave me a line of defense against the lies my fear was feeding me. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was a crack in the wall I'd built around my own potential, and once that crack appeared, the light started getting in. I didn't need 10 steps or a full plan. I needed one sentence that reminded me I had a choice. A choice to stop listening to fear. A choice to start fighting back. A choice to anchor my thoughts to something real, not just whatever panic was shouting in the moment. That's what that verse did. It gave me something solid to stand on when everything else in my mind felt like quicksand. It's hard to describe the exact moment when the shift began, because at first, it didn't feel like anything changed. I didn't suddenly wake up fearless or full of clarity. The thoughts still came. The anxiety still buzzed in the background. But something subtle had happened inside me. The grip that fear had over me began to loosen, and it all started because I didn't just read the verse, I internalized it. I said it out loud, I wrote it down. I kept it where I'd see it every single day. I started to confront every fearful thought with it. Fear would whisper, "You can't do this," and I'd answer it with the verse. Fear would say, "What if you fail?" And I'd push back with the verse. It was like I had finally picked up a weapon after years of standing defenseless. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my thoughts. I was responding with intention. That's where the healing began, not in eliminating fear, but in refusing to obey it. Every time I leaned into that verse, something in me got stronger. I started saying things I used to hold back. I started taking small risks I would have avoided before. I wasn't fearless, but I was bold in spite of the fear. And that changed everything. Fear doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be consistent. So the only way to beat it is to consistently confront it with something louder, something truer. That's what the verse became for me, a louder truth. It reprogrammed the way I saw myself. It reminded me that the fear in my mind was not a reflection of reality. It was just a habit that could be broken. The more I practiced this, the more space I created in my mind, space for peace, space for confidence, space for clarity. I stopped overthinking every move. I started trusting myself again. That mental war I was trapped in. It didn't end overnight, but for the first time I had a strategy to fight back. And once you realize you can fight back, fear loses its power. It becomes background noise instead of the lead voice. That's the shift. That's the healing. That's the beginning of peace. Here's what's wild. The verse didn't take away the fear. It just made me see it for what it really was, a parasite. It couldn't survive once I stopped feeding it my attention, my belief, my energy. And that's the key most people miss. You don't need to wait for fear to leave before you move. You just need to stop letting it lead. Once I understood that, I realized I had been giving my fear way too much respect. I was treating it like a voice of reason, when really it was just noise. Loud, persistent noise. That verse became my filter. Every time a thought came up, I'd run it through that line and ask, is this truth or is this fear? That alone was enough to disrupt the loop. Because fear feeds on passivity. It thrives when you don't question it. But the moment you shine light on it, it starts to shrink. That's what the verse did. It flipped the switch. It didn't promise ease or perfection. But it did offer power, power to choose what voice I listened to, power to pause the spiral, power to take back control. You don't have to scream at your fear to beat it. You don't have to fake confidence or act brave when you're falling apart inside. You just need one truth you can come back to when everything feels shaky. That verse became mine, and eventually it rewired the way I showed up in life. Not because I was suddenly fearless, but because I stopped letting fear be the loudest thing in the room. I started speaking to it differently. I started treating it like background static instead of gospel truth. And the more I stood in that truth, the more I realized healing doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it starts in silence. Sometimes it begins with a whisper. And sometimes all it takes is one verse. One line that lands in your soul at the exact moment you're ready to hear it, not before, not when you're still bargaining with your fear, but in that sacred, desperate second when you're ready to let go of the lie and reach for something real. So here's the truth: fear didn't disappear from my life. It still shows up, still tries to whisper, still tries to shake me, but it doesn't own me anymore. That one verse didn't just inspire me, it armed me. It gave me a line in the sand, a way to separate truth from lies. And when your mind is constantly throwing you worst case scenarios, that clarity is everything. That's what healed me, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger, something grounded, something I could hold on to when everything else felt like it was spinning. Maybe you're where I was, overwhelmed, stuck in your own head, constantly questioning yourself. If you are, let me just say this: you are not broken. You are not weak. You are not your fear. You are just one truth away from shifting everything, one sentence away from clarity, one verse away from peace. And that verse, it didn't just destroy my fear. It reminded me that I've always had the power to choose, to believe something better, to speak to myself with strength, to move forward even when I'm shaking. You don't need to fix everything today. Just find your one verse, let it sit in your heart, let it speak louder than your doubt, and when fear tries to creep in again, and it will, you'll know exactly how to answer it. That's how it begins, that's how it changes. And that's how it heals, one verse, one choice, one moment at a time.